I wanted to take a look at Photopea today, which is a terrible name and I hate even saying it. But this is the Photoshop alternative program that we're going to use, at least for right now. So you notice I opened a web browser and I went to photopea.com. And when you do, it brings up this screen. Now, if you are a Photoshop user, so if you've been in your book before or if you just used it in the past, this layout is going to look very similar. I know most of you haven't used Photoshop, but if you're one of those people that did, I want to tell you a few things. I don't understand this program. This is almost an exact copy of Photoshop. Some of the icons look a little different, but you'll notice everything is in the same layout. And for some reason, all the shortcuts work. So if you're used to holding Control and plus to zoom in and that sort of thing, it all works. Layers is over here. There's the history. There's your swatches. And some things look different, like the graphical design is different, but everything seems to work. I will say this, though. It's a little janky at times because it is free. And I don't want to say it lacks features because everything I've asked it to do, it will do. The only problem is things like filters. If you remember Photoshop, you go to filters and there's a ton of filters. Well, you go to filters and there might be 5 now. And that's the only thing I really notice is different, but for the most part, we're not going to use that anyways. Today, we're just going to look at the basic layout of Photopea very quickly, and hopefully you can learn a little bit about it, and if you need to, you can always come back and kind of use this as a reference video. So this is what you get as a screen when you open up. This little section right here is different from Photoshop, but it just asks you want to make a new project, you want to open one from the computer. So if you've got a photo you want to manipulate or you got a page you've already been working on, I don't ever use free templates, and there's some demos here if you've never used anything like this before. For us, we're usually just going to do a new project. So I'm going to click on a new project just so we have something. And you'll notice that this also looks different than Photoshop, but it works the same way. Again, there's templates, and by all means, I'm not telling you you can't use a template. So if you want to play with these or if you want to use these, go for it. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to inches because that's just what my brain understands. And if we are going to make a yearbook page, then it would be 17 inches wide and 11 inches tall. If we're going to make a single page, though, like a piece of notebook paper, which is what I'm going to do here, I can set this to 8.5 wide, 11 tall, and that's the same size as a sheet of paper. DPI is the resolution. The lower this is, the faster everything works, but the less pretty it's going to look. It's going to be more grainy and stuff. So if I'm doing Photoshop on a good computer, I work at 300 DPI. Past that's just it's not as huge files, and there's no point in it. You can't tell with the human eye past 300. But for working on the web, let's do 150. That's about half as much, but I don't really know we'll notice that much difference in quality, and it's going to save us some computation time. So we could rename it here if we want to, and I'm just going to click Create. And now we've got a little white document that we can draw on, write on, do whatever we want to with. The first thing I would like to point out to everyone is I want to look at the overall interface. Let's look at this right-hand side. Notice on the very right-hand side, right above my big old head, there's an empty spot on my screen, but this is where they put advertisements, and they're super annoying because it takes away working space, but again, free program, so I'm okay with it. But right now, for some reason, the advertisement didn't load, so it's a blank spot. Here you have history. So you notice we open a new file, and it says open. If I do something, so if I get the paintbrush and I paint, it says I use the brush tool. If I get the eraser and I erase, which I'm erasing the background there too, that's why you see the little checkers, but it tells me, hey, you used the eraser tool. I don't know how many steps it saves. I believe it saves 20 things you do. But the wonderful thing about the history is, and you can always press like Control Z to undo stuff. But let's say you want to go back 15 steps ago and you don't have to press Control Z, 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 Z. I can just go click on whatever step I want to. So if I don't want to have done any of this I can just go back to open and it brings us to the point where we open the page. History is super important. Below that is our layers panel. And of course, all of this junk, that's the screen recorder is in the way, including me. So I'm going to scoot me over for a second. It is really creepy to watch me move and not move. All right. You notice we have channels, we have paths, we have layers. I don't ever use the channels. Some people do. I'm not really going to. We're going to stick usually with history, and we're going to usually stick with layers. One of the most powerful things in Photoshop is its ability to make layers, and you need to understand layers. So right now, there is this one layer, and it is just this white square, and you see, or white rectangle. You see that. I'm going to make a new layer. The new layer pops up, and we have another layer. Think of these as sheets of glass stacked on top of each other. Checkerboard means empty. So right now there's a blank piece of glass. But watch this. If I paint, I'm going to get my brush tool, and I'm going to paint again. See some of my lovely art. Notice that, I don't know if you can see it, but the little green showed up here. I didn't actually paint on this white canvas. If I get my move tool, I can now move this, and my white canvas is not moving. I think to better illustrate this, let me make another layer. I'm going to switch colors. So let's pick like a blue. And I'm not drawing on the green layer. I'm going to get my paintbrush, and I'm going to paint this kind of bluey purple color, except these are separate objects. Now they're on separate layers. So I can take this blue one and move it separate. If I click on the green one, I can move the green one separately. And notice the little dotted line tells me which layer is active. It also kind of, I don't know if you call it a highlight, it low lights it, it's gray. So if I want to move the blue thing and my green layer is active and I grab the move tool, then it moves green, not blue. So you have to make sure you're on the correct layer. In the layers panel, we have blend modes. We'll talk more about those later. You have layer tools. We have a delete layer. So if I click that, boom, blue layer is gone. We have make a new one. We have group. Sometimes in Photoshop, you're going to have hundreds of layers. So maybe you want to group certain ones together to help with organization. The rest of these are special ones, and we'll talk about those later, like the layer mask and that sort of thing. If you are a Photoshop user, notice the FX button now says EFF. That's like the little changes they do. I have no idea why. All right, but I'm going to be done with that. I'm going to move my little head over here. Notice also my history now shows everything I did. As long as I didn't do more than 20 or whatever it's set to, I can always go back over here and click open, and I am now back to my blank canvas where I started. Notice the layers are gone. I can get each step back and each thing I did by clicking on them, but I'm just going to go back to open and clear everything out. You noticed on the left-hand side over here, I grabbed my pen tool to paint. I picked my color from here. These are your drawing tools. If you put the mouse over it and just let it sit, so I'm not touching anything, you see it says Move Tool. If I put it over the Lasso tool and let it sit, it says Lasso Select. It will tell you what they are. Every one of these has a little arrow in the corner. If you right-click on it, they have more options. So this rectangle select tool also has an ellipse select tool hidden in there. So any of them, I know layer's locked. I'm not trying to do anything. Any of them that have a little triangle in the corner, I can right click and it will show me the other tools. If you look at the magnifying glass, there's no zoom tool. So if I right click, it doesn't do anything. In the move tool, there's nothing. They are usually divided into sections. So it's really, really faint, but you can kind of see a little tiny line right there. Everything above here is my drawing tools. So these are, I'm sorry, not drawing tools. Everything above here are like my selection tools. So these are going to let me select things. Below that are my drawing tools. So these are going to let me paint with a paintbrush or stamp things or erase things. And then below that are vector tools, and we'll talk about those later. But just know you've got your tools on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, you have all of your history and your layers. Oh, I didn't talk about swatches. So swatches are just chunks of color. So if I want to pick a color, if I want red, I can just come to swatches and click red. Notice that color changes over here. I hardly ever use the swatches. If I want a color, you can come over here and just click this, and you can pick any color in the rainbow you want to. Tell it okay, and it's selected. At the top, we have our file menus. So you've got things like open and save. We have edit menus, and then we'll talk about each one of these kind of individually as we go through things. But you just got your normal tools here, or your normal menus. What I do want you to notice, yes, I know the layer is locked. What I do want you to notice is right now I have the move tool selected. Notice when I put the mouse over it, first of all, a little V shows up. That V means the keyboard shortcut to get this tool is V. If I put it on the paintbrush, notice that the brush tool shortcut is B. So I'm going to select the paintbrush. Now watch the arrow tool. If I just hit V on the keyboard, now it's my move tool. And I'm sorry, I keep changing the terms. Sometimes I call it arrow tool, sometimes I call it the move tool. If I want to switch back to the paintbrush, I can pick B, and it goes right back to the paintbrush. So if you put your mouse over it and let it sit, you can see what the shortcut is. Some of them I remember. B for brush tool, E for eraser. So you put over the eraser, it says E. Some of them I don't remember because they're not tools I use that often. But there are a ton of shortcuts in Photoshop, or in this case, Photopea. So you can use these shortcuts to greatly speed up your process and the things you're doing. What I want you to notice is if I have my move tool up here at the top, these are alignment options. Those alignment options are because I'm moving things. If I switch to the rectangular select tool, notice that this line up here changed. Now these are options for this tool. If I go to my paintbrush, it changed again. These are now options for my paintbrush tool. If I go to the eraser, it's not going to change that much, but it still changes because the eraser works pretty much like the paintbrush tool. It just gets rid of stuff. If I go down here and get my pen tool, then the options change again. So you always have, let's do text. If I click text tool, notice that I now have options for font. I have options for font style. I have font size, font color, alignment, all that lovely stuff. So if you pick a tool and you're like, man, I need to make it bigger or I need to change it, and you can't remember, it's always up here. All right, so that's it for the basic layout. You've got your menus. We've got this little bar here that's going to have all your tool options. We've got our tools. We've got our history and swatches menu, which we just use as history usually. And then we've got our layers, channels, and paths, which we usually just leave on layers. Every great once in a while we use paths, but we pretty much just leave it on layers. Okay, that's it for right now. That's just the basics. Don't worry, we'll get to making stuff and drawing stuff shortly, but that's it for right now.